Hey everyone, hope you're having a great weekend. As promised, I wanted to post the answer key for the practice test for the test that we're going to have up on Tuesday. So let's just jump right in it. Um, so for finding the exact values of inverse trig functions, what we're going to use is the unit circle. So this question is saying, at what angle is inverse sine -1? Anytime you get an inverse trig function, it's asking you an at what angle question. So with inverse trig, we look from our angle should be between pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. So where is sine -1? It's going to be at negative pi over 2. For tangent, just like with sine, it's at what angle is tangent 0? Tangent is 0 at 0. Again, the angles that we look for tangent is between pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. Last up, at what angle is cosine -√3 over 2? So cosine, we look for between 0 and pi. Those are the types of angles we limit our range that we're looking at. So at what angle is cosine -√3 over 2? That's going to be in the second quadrant, and it's going to be at 5 pi over 6. Hopefully this visual will help you out when we're doing these types of angle scavenger hunts. Next up, we have questions that are asking us to use our calculator. So we're going to use our calculator to find the value, round to 2 decimal places in degrees. So let's take out our calculators. Let's zoom in just a little bit. I want to make sure that I'm in degrees. So if I have one of these fancy ones, I can just get my mouse to show up. And then I'm going to go right up here to the battery. It says angle, rad, so I'm going to click, go down to settings and general. I'm going to go down, change my angle to degree. Let's hit enter for degree. And then scroll all the way down. We're going to make that our default. Okay. All right. So now we look at our question. Let's zoom out just a little bit. We got to make sure that this number is in our domain for inverse trig. Now, remember, our domain that we're plugging in is anything between -1 and 1. So 0.1 is in our domain, so that works. So I'm going to type in, it's hopefully without the glare, I'm going to type trig inverse. Let's make sure I'm on the right line. Inverse trig, 0.1, enter. I get 5.73 degrees. 5.739, so it's going to be 5.74 degrees. Next up, I want the inverse tangent of 5. Let's get that both on the same page. So I'm just going to inverse trig, inverse tangent of 5. Our domain for inverse tangent is all reals, so I can put any number in there. And look at that. That's the exact value here. What I could do is hit enter, control enter, and I get an exact value of 78.690. So 78.69 degrees. Last up, cosine. We want cosine of 1/8. So trig inverse cosine of 1 divided by 8. If I hit enter, I don't get a value. So I'm going to hit control enter, and I'm going to see that it's 82.819. So I'm going to round that up to 82.82 degrees. 82.82 degrees. Moving on. Back to finding the exact value, only this time of compound statements. So we first look at the inside. Let's zoom in just a little bit. We look at the inside. What is the cosine of 7 pi over 6? So I'm going to look at my unit circle, and I'm going to say, what is the cosine value of 7 pi over 6? And we should find out that it's -√3 over 2. So now my question becomes what we had earlier. What's the inverse cosine of negative root 3 over 2? Well, I'm going to find that angle. That's 5 pi over 6. Next up, what is the inverse sine of the sine of negative 3 pi over 7? Now, this angle isn't on our unit circle, but what we should realize is that our angle right here is between pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. So when we take the inverse sine of sine, I'm saying, what angle do I get the sine of negative 3 pi over 7? Well, it's just negative 3 pi over 7. Why it didn't work for the original one, number 7, was because the angles that we look for, cosine, should be between 0 and pi. 7 pi over 6 is a little bit bigger, so we have to put it inside the range that we're looking at in order to get a value out. So let's try the next one. Here, we're asking for a value. So we want to make sure that our number is between negative 1 and 1. So what's the sine of the inverse sine of 1/4? Well, this is our theta. We could draw a picture, but really we're just undoing this inverse trig. Because this fits our domain, the answer is just going to be 1/4. Again, for number 10, what's the cosine of inverse cosine of 1.2? We have to make sure that what we're plugging in is inside our domain, and our domain is from negative 1 to 1. We see 1.2 is too big, so this is not defined. And last up, what is the tangent of inverse tangent of 2? The domain for the inverse tangent is all reals, so these two just undo each other, and I'm left with 2. At what value is this angle 2? Well, it's just 2. Moving on. Finding the inverse. So we're given a function, and I'm asking you to find the inverse. So remember, we first write it with a y. This one has a y. So the second step is switch the x with a y. Let's put a y there. Now we just solve for y. So divide by negative 2. I'm going to take the inverse cosine of both sides. So I have 3y equals inverse cosine of negative x over 2. And then I divide by 3. So y equals, I'm just going to put a 1/3 inverse cosine of negative x over 2. You could just as easily write this all over 3, but this keeps it a little easier to read. Other inverse question. Okay, so we have it with a y. Second step, switch the x and the y. So we have x equals 4 sine y minus 1 plus 2. Subtract 2 minus 2. Divide by 4. Take the inverse of both sides. So I have the inverse sine of x minus 2 over 4 equals y minus 1. Let's get that on screen. And the last step, add 1. So I have the inverse sine of x minus 2 over 4 plus 1 equals y. There's my answer. Last bits. Find the exact value of each. So I want to first locate my angle here, because inverse cosine is an angle question. So what angle is cosine negative root 3 over 2? Well, we've come to this problem a couple times so far. So this is really saying, what is the tangent of 5 pi over 6? So we're going to look at our unit circle, and we're going to see that the y value is 1/2. The x value is negative root 3 over 2. Now if we simplify this, we get negative 1 over root 3, which is negative root 3 over 3. That's a value question because we're asking what is the tangent. So we got a value here. Next up, what is the cosecant of inverse tangent of 1? Well, first, let's find our angle. Tangent's from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So we find out that the tangent of 1 is where the x and y are the same value and it's positive. So that only place that's going to be is at pi over 4. So we're saying, what is the cosecant of pi over 4? Well, we know that cosecant is 1 over sine. So this is really saying, what is 1 over the square root of 2 over 2, which is 2 over root 2, which if we rationalize that, that's 2 root 2 over 2, which is, let's get that all on the screen, see if I can do that, is the square root of 2. That's finding the exact value. Now we're going to move to the second page. We're going to finish up the last bits of problems, and we'll go on from there. All right, so we're on the second page. We're going to finish up finding the exact value for these. So let's start with our inside. That's an angle question. So we're saying, at what angle is tangent negative root 3? That means I want my y value to be negative root 3 over 2. That's my y. And I want my x value to be 1/2. The only place where that's the case is negative pi over 3. So I'm asking you, what is the sine of negative pi over 3? Well, we kind of already know that just based off of the piece. So the sine of negative pi over 3, or we can look at our unit circle, we get negative root 3 over 2. Next one, what is the inverse sine of cosine of 3 pi over 4? So we're looking at an angle question here. So we first want to find the inside piece. What is the cosine of 3 pi over 4? The cosine of 3 pi over 4 is the square root of 2 over 2. That's in the second quadrant. So I want to know at what angle is sine root 2 over 2. Now we look at our unit circle again. We see that sine is root 2 over 2 at pi over 4. Next up, the cotangent, inverse cotangent of square root of 3. Don't let this question trick you. You should be able to do it, but if not, we can rewrite this so it's something that you would recognize. We showed a method earlier this week where you can rewrite the inverse tangent of 1 over root 3. So this question is saying I want my y value to be 1/2 and my x value to be the square root of 3 over 2. So where is this the case? The x value is root 3 over 2, the y value is 1/2. If we look at the unit circle, we see that the inverse tangent, so at what angle is this happening? That's at pi over 6. Last up, the inverse cosecant of negative 2 is the same thing as the inverse sine of negative 1/2. So at what angle is inverse sine negative 1/2? Well, if we look at our unit circle, it's going to be at negative pi over 6. A few more. Using a calculator to find the value, round to the 2 decimal places, make sure we're in degrees. All of these other questions that we're talking about exact values, we're in radians. For these questions that I'm asking you to use a calculator, we're going to be in degrees. So, inverse secant of negative 3 over 2. Now, we don't know how to do these using a simple calculator, but we can use the method that we used right up above, and we can say we're going to flip. Secant is inverse cosine, and then we're going to take the reciprocal of the inside 2. So we get 2 over negative 3. We have to make sure that that's inside our domain, which is from negative 1 to 1, which it is. So I'll just pull up my calculator right here, make sure there's not a glare. I'm going to type inverse cosine of negative 2 over 3. I hit enter. Let's get an exact value. And that's going to be 131.81 degrees. Now these fancier ones also have the other inverse trig functions. So let me just double check to see if I get the exact same value. Look at that. We get the exact same thing whichever way you want to find it. So let's finish these up. So inverse cotangent of 2 is the same as the inverse tangent of 1/2. So I'm going to hit inverse tangent of 1/2. Control Enter. I get the glare out of there. 26.565, so 26.57 degrees. 26.57 degrees. And the last up, the inverse cosecant of 5 is going to be the same thing as the inverse sine of 1/5. Take out my calculator. Inverse sine of 1, oops, let's get out of there, 1/5. Control Enter. I get 11.536, so 11.54 degrees. 11.54 degrees. Last 3 questions. Solving. So with solving, simplest we can do. Divide by 3. Inverse sine of x equals pi over 3. Take the sine of both sides. So I get x equals the sine of pi over 3. I look at pi over 3. I want to know what the sine value is. Looking at our unit circle, x is square root of 3 over 2. Next up, divide by 2. Inverse cosine of 3x equals a negative pi over 2. So we take the cosine of both sides, so we left with 3x equals cosine negative pi over 2. Cosine of negative pi over 2 is pretty simple, but if we look at our unit circle, it is 0. So I have 3x equals 0. So x equals 0. Last one. Divide by 4. Inverse tangent of 2x equals pi over 4. Take the tangent of both sides. 2x equals the tangent of pi over 4. Tangent of pi over 4, we look at our unit circle. We see that it is square root of 2 over 2. So I got 2x equals the square root of 2. This is the square root of 2 over 2 divided by the square root of 2 over 2. So that's just 1. So x equals 1/2. Hopefully these videos have helped you. We'll go over this in class again on Monday and test on Tuesday. Good luck studying.